Sarah's story sent shivers down Grace's spine. She struggled to reconcile the image of her sister's seemingly astute husband with the disturbing tale she was hearing. Yet, as she observed the tremble in the girl's hands and the anguish in her tear-filled eyes, Grace couldn't deny the truth behind Sarah's words. "Do you dare confide in your mom?" Grace approached the question cautiously. "No," Sarah replied with palpable fear. "I'm afraid she won't believe me. She thinks Michael is great. I believe you should tell her regardless. She's your mother after all. Would you like me to talk to her myself?" Sarah nodded, clutching the blanket tightly around herself as if seeking refuge from an encroaching threat. Grace embraced her niece tenderly before stepping out of the room with the phone in hand. A mere year ago, Sarah's family had been steeped in bliss. Jane, her mother, had finally secured a subsidized studio apartment after years of anticipation as an orphan. With her teenage daughter by her side, they had bid farewell to Grace and embarked on a new chapter of independence. It was during this transition that Michael, tall and fair-haired, had entered Jane's life. Grace was taken aback by the peculiarities surrounding her new brother-in-law. Despite Jane juggling 2 jobs, Michael seemed to be constantly present at home. His age, 7 years younger than Jane, also raised Grace's suspicions. Attempting to voice her concerns to her sister, Grace broached the topic cautiously. "Do you ever feel like you rushed into things with Michael? You hardly know him, just a couple of months, and yet you've moved him into the apartment so quickly. Sarah's at such a vulnerable age. What if he ends up hurting her? Sis, don't worry so much. Michael is wonderful and attentive. I've longed for a man like him," Jane replied with a reassuring smile. "But why is he always lounging around at home while you're working double shifts?" Grace persisted. "He's a programmer for a New York City-based company, works remotely. Why are you so fixated on this? The important thing is that I'm happy with him. The rest is just details," Jane retorted defensively. Yet, now Grace found herself grappling with regret, chastising herself for placing too much trust in her younger sister. As she dialed Jane's number, preparing for a serious conversation, she realized her calls were unanswered. Determined to address the issue face to face, Grace instructed Sarah to remain indoors and not to open the door for anyone. On the bus to Jane's workplace, Grace mulled over the impending conversation. She berated herself for failing to recognize earlier the signs of Sarah's sudden withdrawal and aloofness. Finally arriving at the processing plant where her sister was employed, Grace presented her identification at the security desk and entered the sprawling facility. Jane emerged a few minutes later, removing her hair covering inquisitively. "What's the matter? Is Sarah unwell again?" Jane queried. "Not unwell, but there's a pressing matter concerning Michael," Grace began, mustering her courage. "Do you know what he's up to when you're not around?" For the next 2 days of the ultimatum, Sarah stayed with Grace, but Jane refused to part ways with Michael. Whenever questioned, he'd offer the same response. "Don't believe your daughter. She's making it all up." Periodically, Grace's sister would call, issuing threats to get a restraining order against her or forcefully take her daughter away. Faced with this stubbornness, Grace resolved to involve the authorities. The following morning, she and Sarah went to the local police station and filed a formal complaint against Michael. The investigator questioned both Jane and Michael. "My daughter Sarah is making everything up," Jane insisted during the interrogation. "There's just a conflict between her and her partner, so she's lying about him. My sister Grace is only helping her daughter out of loneliness and jealousy of my happiness." Since Sarah lacked substantial evidence against Michael, her claims were dismissed. During his testimony, Michael appeared confident, if not audacious. "The girl herself developed feelings for me, and when I rejected her, she threatened to tell her mother," Michael asserted. Despite an examination by a gynecologist yielding no evidence of injuries, Sarah was compelled to sign a waiver and sent home with her mother. Grace, meanwhile, faced threats of filing a false report. Throughout the night, Grace couldn't find peace, wrestling with how to protect Sarah and expose the villainous acts of Michael. Early the next morning, she resolved to visit Jane's home and discreetly monitor Michael and Sarah's interactions. Positioned on the first floor, her sister's apartment afforded her a clear view into the room. Concealed amidst the lilac trees near Jane's balcony, Grace ensured her presence remained unnoticed. Moments later, Jane emerged and headed towards the bus stop for work. Drawing closer to the balcony, Grace spotted Michael watching Jane depart. Peering through a neighboring window, she observed a pale Sarah sweeping the kitchen. Suddenly, Michael appeared behind the girl, discarding his bathrobe as he approached her. Though frightened, Grace resolved to capture evidence of Michael's abhorrent actions on her phone. Swiftly activating the camera, she discreetly snapped several photos before loudly tapping on the window. Startled, Michael hastily distanced himself from Sarah and began to dress. Sarah hastily grabbed her windbreaker and dashed out of the apartment in her slippers. She made a beeline for the playground, praying her partner wouldn't pursue her. Grace, struggling to keep pace, finally managed to shout, "Sarah, wait, don't run." "Godmother, what are you doing here?" Sarah turned around, tears streaming down her face. "I've come for you. We need to go to the police right away," Grace urged urgently. "You know they won't believe me." "Godmother, you should go before he sees you and tells Mommy," Sarah pleaded, her voice trembling with fear. "Don't worry, my dear. They'll believe us this time. I have proof," Grace reassured her. An hour later, Sarah and Grace arrived at the police station. The investigator initially attempted to dismiss them, but Grace promptly produced her phone and displayed the incriminating photos. Grimacing at the disturbing images, the officer retrieved a statement form. "Write down every detail, how, when, and how many times it happened," he instructed Sarah. After taking a sip of water and gathering her composure, Sarah began to painstakingly recount the nightmare she had endured over the past 3 months. Half an hour later, Jane and Michael arrived at the police station. Jane shot a glare at Grace before seating herself at the table and vehemently insisting that her daughter was falsely accusing her partner. However, their claims were swiftly countered by the presentation of irrefutable evidence, the chilling photographs. In a last-ditch effort to deflect blame, Jane accused Grace of fabricating the images to slander Michael. The policeman regarded Jane sternly, recognizing her attempts to shield her partner. "We will, of course, scrutinize the authenticity of these images. However, if it emerges that you were aware of your partner's crimes, you will also face charges. Moreover, you risk losing your parental rights over your daughter," he cautioned. At this warning, Jane visibly calmed, refraining from further attempts to defend Michael. She sat in silence, occasionally shooting a disapproving glance at her elder sister. Meanwhile, Michael was taken into custody, while Jane was released pending further investigation. Under pressure from both the investigator and Child Protective Services, Jane reluctantly granted Grace temporary guardianship over her daughter until the trial concluded. A week later, the results of the expert examination on the photographs provided by Grace arrived. As anticipated by the investigator, they were confirmed to be genuine, without any signs of manipulation. Additionally, the psychologist's report highlighted the systematic abuse suffered by Sarah at the hands of Michael, further substantiating her claims. A month later, Michael's trial took place behind closed doors. During the proceedings, he fully confessed his guilt to Sarah and even appealed for leniency. The court's verdict was decisive: 6 years of imprisonment in a high-security facility and a substantial fine of $60,000 as compensation for emotional damages. In contrast, Jane was found guilty of neglect in fulfilling her parental duties, resulting in a monetary fine. This outcome left Jane seething with anger. Post-trial, she refused to take Sarah back home, leading the girl to continue living with Grace. For several days, Grace and Sarah lived tranquilly, enjoying outings to the shops and visits to the large public zoo. It seemed as though the worst was behind them. However, disaster struck on the night from Saturday to Sunday when a fire erupted in the hay bale storage area of Grace's yard. Awakened by the acrid scent of smoke, Grace emerged from her house to behold the raging flames devouring the barns and outbuildings. "Quickly, run to Aunt Mary for help. We can't handle this alone," Grace instructed Sarah urgently. "I'll try to open the barns and release the animals." With the assistance of firefighters, neighbors, and townspeople from across the area who had rallied to the commotion, Grace managed to contain and extinguish the blaze. Tragically, the fire claimed the lives of 2 cows and a young piglet that Grace had recently acquired from a local farm. Overcome by smoke inhalation, Grace herself fell ill and was advised by the ambulance doctor to seek treatment at the hospital. The following day, Grace received a visit from her neighbor, Aunt Mary, who had stayed with Sarah in her absence. Today, a fire marshal came by. "They suspect arson. Traces of gasoline were found," Aunt Mary informed her. "Goodness, who would want to harm me and Sarah? I don't have any enemies in the village," Grace remarked, visibly shaken. "Perhaps it was Jane causing trouble," Aunt Mary suggested. "I saw her near your house last night, hanging around by the gate, although she didn't come in." Grace grappled with disbelief at the notion of her own sister committing such a heinous act. Could the neighbor be mistaken? She pondered the possibilities throughout the day, but as evening approached, she resolved to confront Jane and seek the truth. Discharged from the hospital, Grace boarded a bus headed for her sister's apartment. Upon arrival, Jane reluctantly opened the door, but showed no intention of inviting Grace inside. "Why are you here? Haven't you done enough damage to my life?" Jane snapped irritably. "Did you start the fire or not?" Grace cut to the chase. "Of course, blame it on me. Next, you'll say I'm responsible for the Kennedy assassination," Jane retorted with scorn. "Aunt Mary saw you near my house yesterday, so quit denying it," Grace persisted. "Since you already know, why bother asking?" "I'm not sorry," Jane declared defiantly. "Jane, you need help. Sarah and I could have perished. I lost 2 barns and livestock. Do you have no remorse?" "What about your daughter?" Grace pleaded. "She's not my daughter. You two are nothing but treacherous snakes. Because of you and Sarah, I've lost Michael," Jane spat venomously. "Enough about your Michael," Grace retorted indignantly. "You'll both rot together in prison." With that, Grace pounded her fist on the door and stormed away. The following day, Grace filed a police report accusing her sister of arson. Aunt Mary corroborated the sighting of Jane near Grace's house. Jane confessed to her actions, admitting she sought to harm her sister and daughter due to her own grievances. The court convicted Jane of arson, sentencing her to 3 years in prison. Sarah remained under Grace's care, and she recently completed 9th grade, embarking on a path to study accounting at a community college. I hope you enjoyed this story. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more awesome stories in the future. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey, and we'll see you next video.